Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, empowering men and masculinity in the anti-male age. I'm your host, Brian Crawl, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about why modern women cannot pair bond. But first, before I get started, would you mind hitting that like button for me? Because you know any women who watch this are going to hit the dislike button. Thanks. It's no secret that marriage and relationships just really aren't even hardly a thing anymore. And even when you think that you really, finally are going to have one, you end up being mistaken and the girl runs out on you. This is something all of us men have been through countless times with so many different types of women that most of us are left dazed and confused by the modern dating scene and how flaky and flighty modern females are and just giving up on it all, which is quite understandable. So why are things this way? Why is it that women just can't seem to commit and stay with any one man anymore and always end up leaving us? Or, in other words, to be more concise, why can't modern women pair bond? Well, there is a number of reasons. The first and foremost reason, of course, is high body count. Women these days have had a lot of partners usually, and studies from both Harvard and the University of Utah have shown that with more partners, women lose the ability to pair bond. You see, what happens with lots of sex and lots of sex partners is the same thing that happens with using drugs. You are introducing chemicals to the brain that produce certain psychological and emotional states. In this case, those chemicals are pair bonding hormones. Those pair bonding hormones are meant to keep people who have sex together because sex is supposed to produce offspring. That is why when you first start having sex, it produces very strong feelings in you for the person, even if they aren't really merited. You might fall in love with your first sex partner and want to marry them. And this, of course, happens more for women than it does for men, and it also varies from person to person. But I'm sure we can all remember how extremely powerful the feelings that were produced in us by our first lay were, unless it was a completely horrible experience for you like it was for me. But after that, the more you have sex, the more you lose your sensitivity to the chemicals that it produces in the brain, just like with drug use. You develop a tolerance, and the effects of them fade more and more. There's other psychological factors at play as well. For instance, the more sex you have, the more you treat it and your partners more casually, right? The more you think of it as less of a rare and highly valuable thing, right? And the more it becomes something you view as more commonplace, and thus you become more casual and nonchalant about it. It doesn't hold as much importance in your mind, right? So of course, you're not going to be feeling or thinking about it as profoundly. And if you continue to have sex more and more and basically become like a sex addict, as I was, you will start to become actually numb to a lot of sensations. Things that used to produce powerful sensations in you now produce absolutely none. So first you start to lose the emotional feelings, and then you can actually lose your physical feelings, all right, as your tolerance grows. So you can see how there's an inverse relationship with the amount of sex that you're having with different partners and your ability to pair bond, because it is just producing less and less hormones. And that does happen for men too, but men are more able to reverse it and become monogamous even after being promiscuous when in your prime, because of the fact that we are more wired for both of those things, and we also have more mental wherewithal to face the kind of adaptive mental challenges of changing lifestyles like that. Men have more of the mental capacity to be able to change their brain and rewire it and do things such as overcoming addiction and changing lifestyles and sexual habits, whereas women find it far harder to do, and they are also having a lot more sex than men are these days. All right, and the more attractive the woman, the more men she's generally going to have been with. So whereas I've mentioned before having had 86 female partners, which, you know, I don't look as good as I did when I was getting laid the most, of course, right? So I look more average than I used to when I was younger and was really in my prime. But, I was at best like a 7 or maybe an 8 if I was like, dressed up to the nines. And then, through seduction, I could get women to think of me as more. But all that being said, I'm more on the average side. So 86 partners is a high number for a man like me, right? It wouldn't be for a male model who could easily have, over 100. But for a man like me, obviously, that's a lot. However, even for an average or below average girl, a girl who is not as attractive as me, that would be a low number, depending on how old she is and how much time she's had to have experience, right? If she was my age, that would be an extremely low number, right? Because she's had 2 decades worth of time to have experience. So a lot of women will easily have numbers in the hundreds, and like I said, the more attractive the girl, the higher the numbers could potentially be. All right, so you have to consider the extreme effects that is having on the female mind in rewiring it in the same way that addiction does. And many of the women with the higher body counts are actual sex addicts. So, it is actually changing the female's brain in a way that she is probably never going to be able to change back. And that is just the first thing. The second is the perception of an overabundance of options that women have due to the internet and the oversaturation of the online dating marketplace. And thus, what that causes in the female mind is what is called in psychology decision-making fatigue. And what this means is that decision is a process that requires mental energy, right? So making decisions will actually tire you out mentally, and the more decisions a person has to make, the less able they become to make them. All right. So what marketers have found when testing this is that, for instance, if you were to present someone with dozens of samples versus just a few, people are going to have a much better time choosing from just a few samples than many samples. In fact, many people don't know what to choose when presented with too many samples, even though they're free. All right. And when they're presented with very few, they sample a couple and then they buy one. So that is the effect decision-making fatigue can have on someone. When you're presented with too many choices, you just don't know what to do. And if you want to learn more about this effects and the economics of the sexual marketplace for women, check out my video on female monogamy and loyalty linked below. But now on to the next thing. Number 3 is female social conditioning, especially on social media today, has turned them all way too narcissistic to be able to have a healthy, committed relationship, especially a monogamous one, because now, due to all of this, they're really only capable of serial monogamy with codependency at best, which basically means that they're going to be using someone until they no longer want to need them and then break up with them suddenly and instantly monkey branch to someone else and repeat this over and over. And one of the aspects of this social conditioning and why they do this is the next one, number 4, and that is chronic dissatisfaction that women get due to being on what is called the hedonic treadmill. And, again, this is due to the modern social conditioning. And what this means is that women will always want something different than what they already have. Whenever they get what they want, they stop wanting it and start wanting something else. Okay? All women ever want is more. They never want the things that they already have because they suffer from chronic dissatisfaction. This is called the hedonic treadmill in psychology. And then another one of the psychological issues that causes their lack of ability to pair bond are their attachment issues, specifically what is called avoidant attachment in psychology. And what that is it's the type of commitment issues we talk about when someone fears getting too attached to others intimately, and it makes them anxious because they don't want anyone to have any sort of emotional effect on them like that, right? They don't want to feel emotionally vulnerable. So they tend to be very flaky and flighty whenever they begin connecting with someone, and will often, push you away or, run off on you, because they just scare too easily. All right. They have avoidant attachment And the thought of getting too attached to someone makes them extremely anxious, all right? It is a form of neurosis. So that's why even when things are going great between you two, just catching feelings makes them freak out and run off. And these issues usually come from the next thing, which is their parents not modeling healthy attachment and relationship dynamics and paradigms to them, and giving them an unhealthy or broken model of love, marriage, and family. And these girls are oftentimes just repeating a pattern that was programmed into them by their mothers. However, they also receive a lot of social conditioning from culture at large, which leads me to the next thing, and that is how female promiscuity is promoted by feminism and the gynocentric popular culture that we live in and all of its media and other forms of programming and messaging. So women now equate promiscuity with female empowerment. And in fact, due to the social conditioning about sexual empowerment, women who are not as promiscuous as their peers may actually feel bad about it, or even be intentionally prude-shamed by their friends so that their friends won't feel like sluts in comparison. And women are also wired by culture to treat sex as a transactional interaction. So, in other words, they are all basically prostitutes. It is only natural, and something that is found throughout nature and the animal kingdom. In fact, to the female of the species, sex is always a transaction and something they wish to gain something out of. All right, be it pleasure and fun, a child which will be able to survive and also not exhaust their livelihood in doing so, monetary compensation, care and help, long-term commitment and a relationship, or any other types of resources she may want or need. If their culture is such that they have more to gain from getting and staying married and loyal to one man, that is what they will do. If their culture is such that they have more to gain from being non-monogamous, that is what they will do. What kind of culture do we live in here now? One that promotes female non-monogamy. So that is what they do. And then speaking of culture, let's talk about what the government has done, which is the next thing. Number 8, women are incentivized by the feminazi government to divorce their husbands and remarry hypergamously and repeatedly, as the government awards them with cash and prizes whenever they do so. So, of course, that is what they do. It has been made the most logical thing for them to do. And as a social scientist, what I do with my observations is I look for patterns, large scale trends. And one thing you'll notice in studying these things and history, right, is that there's this effect called the Pendulum Effect. Basically, things tend to swing back and forth from one extreme to the next over the course of many years, like decades or generations. And so things can only remain a certain way for so long before the pendulum swings and things become the opposite way for a while. And women used to be more interested in monogamy and marriage than even men were, because they were made by the government and society to need men and be unable to live independently. They got sick of that, and so they entered politics and changed government policy so that they can live independently and use men for both sex and money, and even made marriage about them exploiting men as well. Basically, women wanted to see what it would be like for them to be able to behave like men sexually. And so that's what they have been doing, and it turns out they're very good at it. Right? And so a big reason is that women don't pair bond anymore because the paradigm has shifted and the entire socio-political system of civilization that we live in has been restructured for female promiscuity, polyandry, which means women taking multiple long-term partners or marrying multiple men or having a harem of men, basically any dynamic in which a woman has multiple male partners, and other types of relationship dynamics that are the opposite of the way things used to be. That is just the way things are now, because that is where the pendulum is on the spectrum now. But then lastly, number 10, and perhaps most surprisingly and importantly, women may have never actually even been inherently wired for lifelong pair bonding to begin with, which would explain why marriage was invented in the first place. Some scientists say that humans are not as technically a pair bonding species as other species of animals are, such as birds. And when you research pair bonding, you'll find that the species of pair bonding birds that pair bond even stronger than humans do also don't always practice monogamy. Mating for life doesn't necessarily mean only having just one partner throughout your entire life. All right, and if that's the way it is for birds, and we aren't even sure if humans pair bond as much as birds do, well, that says a lot. So, being monogamous may actually go against our actual, real, innate nature. And other scientists who study primates seem to think that it is probably more natural for humans to be polyamorous and have multiple romantic partners without commitment, or polygynous and have a group of committed partners, or polygamous, which is one man with multiple committed female partners, or a harem, like all of the rest of the species in the primate family are. And it makes sense if you think about it, because monogamy is a social convention, and marriage is a social institution. Without society to create social organization, humans probably wouldn't be practicing these things. They were things we did for socio-political purposes, which women probably do not have the intellectual capacity to understand, or the integrity or willpower to practice, unless they are enforced by the state, which is why they were. Female nature tends to be hedonistic to a fault. They find it near impossible to get themselves off of the hedonic treadmill without a strong dominant man to exercise some sort of patriarchal managerial control over their lifestyle, as we've been seeing since the hippie revolutions of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which shifted the paradigm and allowed women to become free-spirited enough to descend into complete chaos, as they are now liberated from any patriarchal control that would stop them from living as whimsically and willy-nilly as they want to, which is exactly what they've been doing in the past generations. Without the intellectual organizational factors in society that were provided by the ancient patriarchal ways, women apparently will revert back to their primal animalistic nature and will behave just like female bonobos or chimpanzees. And you can look up their sexual habits if you want to know what I'm inferring there. But basically what this all means is that women cannot be expected to pair bond anymore. They just simply are not capable of it. They are only capable of being fucked. Female monogamy is a myth, and probably was never inherent to their female brain and nature anyways, and was only made possible through strict patriarchal government control and marriage contracts that were legally binding. So if you want to bring the institution of marriage, or just even the social convention of monogamy back, we have to return to the values of the patriarchy. And if you want to hear me speak on that, check out the video linked below. And until no-fault divorce has been abolished, and marriage contracts become actually legally binding again, and marriage becomes a real thing again, just don't trust them, because any commitment given to you by a woman is just an empty promise. And I recommend doing what I do and just going your own way, because there really are no good women left today who are girlfriend material, let alone marriage material, or even ones who are just worth dating and being in the company of at all. Women these days just simply cannot relate to men in a healthy, constructive way. They're not capable of healthy emotional connections. They're not capable of interesting intellectual conversations. They are not capable of having a healthy sexual dynamic. They're not fun anymore. They treat dates like job interviews. So for me, even casual dating just seems pointless. And when you look at all of these reasons together, we can quite easily sum it all up by saying that modern feminist culture has turned women into a bunch of degenerate sluts and whores. And I, for one, don't even want to have sex or spend time with a woman like that, let alone go out on a date with them. But if you feel the need to get laid, fine. Just never overestimate a woman's commitment and loyalty to you, even if she promises you that she is fully committed to you and only you, even if she vows. Those words are all just empty promises, which is actually what I'm going to be talking about in the next video. So that concludes this one. Thanks for listening. I hope I mansplained that good enough for you. If I did, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and check out the links below for more resources for your masculine self-development. And if you can afford to donate, please do so with the PayPal link below, because your support helps fund me doing this work and fighting the good fight for men like you. You can stay tuned for that next video coming out soon, which is on women's empty promises. And otherwise, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.